start with your name and what your job is?
Patrick C. File, and I am Assistant Professor of Media Law at the Reynolds School of Journalism at the University of Nevada. Yeah, so it's important to understand when we're talking about hate speech. We're not talking about a legal category, at least not under American law. When we talk about hate speech, we're sort of talking about, I'd say, what I'd call a social category of speech, speech that is hateful, and because of that fact is generally offensive to large groups of individuals or singular individuals, and it is rooted in sort of an ideology or an ethos of hate or suppression of a person based on their identity, or an oppression of a person based on their identity. And you can see that I'm having trouble in some ways defining it clearly because of the fact that it doesn't have a clear legal definition like some other categories of speech do.
Make America great again! 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 Make America great again!
Offending my sensibility.
It depends, and so if it's, I guess I would say generally if it's offensive to you based on the fact that it is hateful, then you would say, yeah, that's hate speech, right? If it's offensive to you for other reasons, then maybe you would say it wasn't hate speech. From my standpoint, and from somebody who studies and teaches about media law and about the First Amendment, it's while a relevant and important question, it's not one that has a legal answer.
Conservative and libertarian movement that is going nowhere so long as the left continues to prioritize Muslim feelings over gay lives. So long as the left continues to prioritize the feelings of sociopathic feminist bitches over everybody else.
Marching around in the street with a swastika-laden flag is absolutely protected by the First Amendment, absent some other kind of action that would be could be something that would be an expression of violence, and I shouldn't say an expression of violence, but a violent act, an act of sort of express intimidation, something that would make another person feel threatened for some sort of imminent violence or threat of harm to them. I think one of the realms that I spend probably the most time or a lot of time writing about and thinking about and sort of studying is the journalist privilege. So this is the idea that reporters should have the ability to refuse to hand over secret sources or private information that they know that the government doesn't know when the government comes to them and says, we're doing an investigation, you have to tell us who, sort of who told you this information or what you know or things like this. And the reason I think it's interesting is because it raises some really fundamental questions about the role of journalists in society, right? And how their role counter to the government, or as sometimes an adversary of the government in the interest of informing the public, can clash. And so I think it's a really interesting question for me. It's one that we don't have a really good answer for. The courts are sort of, and the law on it is somewhat undecided. On the one hand, most states have recognized that journalists do have at least some limited right in some circumstances to say, no, in the interest of me being able to do my job and the public being better informed, I don't have to hand over that information to the government unless the government can prove that they absolutely have to have it, or that they can't find it from any other source. On the other hand, there is no federal privilege. The U.S. Supreme Court has found that there isn't a First Amendment-based privilege. So states can come up with their own laws. The federal government, Congress, could come up with a law that protected this privilege if they wanted to. But the First Amendment doesn't require it. And so it's this interesting place. I mean, you can kind of, as I like to say to my students in the media law class, you could study that case and get almost everything you need to know about the relationship between the First Amendment and the government and journalists all in one place, because it sort of deals with all of those issues in such a kind of comprehensive way. So I think that's a really interesting question, and probably one that from the very beginning and on through to today, for the 10 or 15 years that I've been doing this work, has been driving in some form or fashion the work that I do. And it also deals with evolutions in technology, right? I mean, it deals with the question of who's a journalist today. It deals with questions of evolving professional practices, right? Like when journalists decide to keep secrets, that's something that's changed over time too. And so it's just got all kinds of really interesting, sort of nooks and crannies of that one big question to sort of investigate and learn a lot more. And so that's something that really drives my interest.